Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 25. Triumph. Our arrival home was surreal, crazier than I ever could have imagined. From back in the carriages with my 3 closest friends, we were sitting back merely watching empty alleyway streets suddenly teem with life, bursting with mid-afternoon cheers and applause of rapidly growing citizens coming out from their small city homes. Farmers, tradesmen, friends and family shouting to those they knew, some clapping and crying with joy as they joined the crowding masses along the sidelines of the large main entrance road, ecstatic to see so many of their loved ones return home safely. We hadn't told anyone of our triumph yet, but somehow they all appeared to be well aware of it. They were all smiling and waving frantically to us from the back opening of our bleak-looking carriage as we were graciously received into the castle through the first few side streets beside the underground tunnel gates and over towards the huge flat market square of town, where the palace and courts resided in wait for us. 2 fractured halves finally being reunited as one fully pledged legion of soldiers who all happily begun to reconvene with their fellow military comrades beside the large sandstone columns of the courtroom steps, together forming perfect military lines in rows, behind one small white brick podium, just outside of the large doorway and roof enclosure of the royal palace, on the opposing end of the middle market square and adjacent court. Between the long paved steps of the courts and the palace steps upon the other side, nobody was precisely sure which way the king was going to enter from, whether he would be up and about already somewhere over on that far side of town, or within his palace due to the constant night shifts required to maintain the fiery but splintering former sun-spired diamond stone. Nevertheless, 100 wary yet spriteful soldiers stood firm and patient for him to arrive, all secretly wishing he would come out just a little bit quicker so he could announce the end of their service and allow them to disband from their lines so they could run off and hug their waiting families. Strangers who had no clear relation to any of the soldiers were also in attendance coming among us. Orphan kids and elderly widows silently nudging their way to the front of the crowds, offering nothing but their unyielding support and undying admiration for the soldiers who'd vowed to uphold their crusade in keeping them safe and eliminating evil. After 2 decades of unending mayhem, the war had finally been won, and peace would once again prevail. The gnolls had indisputably failed. The Sunspire's resurrection was unstoppable. The crystal and its essential technical components all remained safely within the city's protective borders, ushered up to the royal palace doors in carriages by half a legion on either side. Wood crates carrying various metal braces and wires were chauffeured by guards past our most delighted and euphoric king as he came out of the palace still in his morning robe. He showed himself before his guards and eager fans by walking out from the shaded front pillar steps of his house and into the bright brilliance of day, waving to the public and shaking every serviceman's hand, while he too waited anxiously for his wife and kids to return home. I spotted a florist handing out boxes of dyed red and gold petals to children, as he freely encouraged them to throw them out towards the wheels of the supply caravans and carriage wagons that were still being coached in by the spiders towards us, and the long sandy palace entrance steps beside the king, his guards and the ever-increasing public crowd standing together in respectful wait for all of the carriages to arrive. We had all shared what felt like a lifetime of experiences together. Arlo, Anera, Akoni, and I were humbly awaiting to leave the carriage and step out before the city folk. We were the 3rd carriage from the front, but we were going to be one of the first to get out among the crowd, and we'd also been entrusted to oversee and protect the huge diamond in the caravan just in front of us. And so, approaching the central pavement as King Helios made the middle marketplace space his own podium, he smiled and waited for all his servants to quickly rush out with their brooms and brush the pavement clean before he attempted to raise his hands up and comment about our sudden arrival back home, only to be caught off guard as his wife surprised him by coming out from one of the closest clusters of the military cloud, diving onto her gray-bearded husband energetically, almost as if it were an attack of affection. A crowd all laughing to their showmanship, as many were surprised he was capable of catching her at all, considering his much older age. All vitality aside, however, he kissed her passionately, just like a young in love man would, igniting the enormous and fanatic crowd, elevating their cheering, proving to all that they were a devoted family coming back together again, just like any other in the capital. Our queen wasted no time in telling him of our success, talking closely into his ear as she held everyone else's complete and undivided attention among the shiny mid-afternoon sun and its gleaming crowd. She pointed towards our carriage with a sense of pride and victory, signaling for his son to come out and show himself before his future subjects. But before Arlo got out of the carriage, he took one last look at me, smiling and shaking his head with embarrassment as war drums started up and the crowd chanted for him to come out. He then jumped down from the carriage and walked over to the next one before the crowd, taking out the unearthly man-sized crystal from the carriage over, the crowd falling into a frenzy of clapping and shouting as he held it up with all his might, only to slug it along over towards his home and its shaded palace steps. He paid little attention to the screams of affection and admiration, doing his best to maintain a warrior's composure, which was baffling considering how insanely heavy that clear rock was, only offering back a few smiles as he hefted the stone up the steps exhaustedly. Ebony came running down the palace steps to greet him, pretending to jump onto him while he battled to hold the crystal, mimicking the actions of Arlo's affectionate parents if only to humor the spectating crowd. "Just breathe and take your time," Inara said to me, pressing a hand lightly onto my back in a gentle reassurance as she looked out to the crowd and her mother. I was left battling my own last-minute nerves surrounding the sheer fact that I was next to have to step out into that heavy daylight. "No, seriously, just take your time," she said in comfort towards me. "They will wait all day to put a face to your spreading story," she added jovially. And so I took Inara's advice and paused by the door. Jade was underneath the carriage's back exit below me, holding her broom only to offer me her hand in order to help me down. "Welcome home, hero," she whispered into my ear as I took the plunge. I could feel the civilians all chanting my name through the vibrations along the ground, which drove their way up my legs from under my feet. The vigorous clapping of an overly ecstatic crowd combined by the drumbeats of soldiers standing firm and straight upon my exit in one hugely collaborative respect. Akoni followed after me. The crowd went just as wild, not only because of his appearance, but rather because of Inara. She had hopped down beside him and was currently holding his hand. Together, they gracefully walked up the sandstone steps, a whole new charm and confident swagger about that shy man as Inara walked along with him before her adoring crowd. "We have much to celebrate, but I urge you all to remember there is still much more to do," Helios attempted to shout, trying but failing to speak over the constant cheering of the crowd. "But we can rejoice in the fact that his war will soon be over," he then announced charismatically and ecstatically before his highly jubilant crowd, deliberately lingering his speech to reignite the cheers, having to raise his hands under the most joyous of grins while he attempted to calm an over-eccentric crowd. "But we do owe it all to the brave men and women who stand before us," he exulted, "and to those who don't," he added, looking out to his weary army before moving his eyes to the civilians. "To never let this ever happen again," his voice deepening to signify concern while the warden Adria and a few of her own soldiers pulled Midas from the prisoner carriage upon heavy gold-encrusted chains, littered with sharp ivory spikes turned gold, reflecting the light of the sun as his very presence among the townsfolk brought cold chills to a sudden silent and spineless crowd, tugged and pulled along by the spiky armored knight, who kept her helmet on and her face anonymous from the crowd. "Midas!" Helios shouted with emphasis to his old colleague and current arch-nemesis. "We were merciful with you the last time," he announced while Adria and another 2 hefty soldiers forced the former king down to his knees, easily subdued to the ground due to the spiky pressure of the metal thorns abundant along his arm shackles. Zephyr stood in position behind him with a fixed arrow drawn and aimed at Midas's back, ready to fire it, should Midas attempt to stand up or resist. "We won't be making that mistake again," Helios declared. "Take him away," he ordered. The spectators all applauded Helios's condemnation with their own steady decree of boos and shouts, hurling rocks at their former king as he did his best to tuck in his face and ignore them, left defenseless as those stray rocks struck against his chest and deflected off his 2 shoulder blades, unable to block any of them while both his ankles and wrists remained chained. Next he was dragged away, passing me upon my slow entrance into the palace, the madman's eyes locking with mine as he was dragged away. "Protect our family," he whispered to me with a trembling but determined voice of concern. 3 powerful words stopping me from any further travel, my gaze dumb and confused in both shock and failure as I struggled to iterate any comment back to him. I could only stare and watch Adria slap him in the head as she and her guards wrestled to push him down and past me without further incident. You have no idea what your queen is capable of, he vented to Adria, the same dire seriousness and conviction in his eyes, as he tried to turn his head and look to his aggressors as they all dragged him without care. My wife is the key, you'll see, he shouted defiantly towards me again, elevating the already angry and maddened temperament of all three guards as he was then struck by the blunt back hilt of a crude carving blade Adria had pulled out, dropping him down into a debilitating slump just shy from walking on his knees. She's the key, Kaya, he verbalized backwards towards me as the guards continued to force him downhill towards the lower tunnel entrance. I was left wide-eyed and stunned by what I heard and saw, stuck amidst a multitude of enclosing fans and friends upon the sidelines all around me. I had no choice but to shake off his words and retreat into the palace with the rest of the royal entourage and floating noble dignitaries. Moving to the sides of the palace hallway, just shortly prior to the spiral staircase that led up to the sun spire, I was still trying to overcome the crowd's loud chants and their echoing applause, the sounds greatly dampened by the thick sandstone walls. You're one of theirs now, Kaya, Camilla then said to me, coming out from behind me as she put a hand on my shoulder, a fake smile on her somber face just after hearing the mad rant of her disgraced husband, perhaps holding on to me to brace herself after the painful limp she must have undertaken to make it all the way up the stairs and catch me. She attempted to wipe one stray lingering tear from her eye, before I was to look back and catch a glimpse of it. The clearly distraught wife of Midas was trying to feign happiness to fit in along with all the others celebrating as she had to brush off the grim news about her husband and his upcoming fate. For the first time since the caverns, I got a quick chance to glance down at her inflamed leg. Her left leg was quite swollen and rough, noticeably bigger than her right. It had been braced by two tight wooden stints, which protected the sore red area of the skin immediately around a huge gold handprint grip that was stretched virtually around the entirety of her thigh. Her right arm was far less dramatic, though, having been horizontally lifted into a typical cloth sling in order to relieve the weight of the handprint pressed across her wrist. And although I didn't believe a coney at first when he'd said it, after just one glance upon the wrist, I saw the delicate gold hieroglyphic circuit markings that were embedded into the skin. Only to me they looked much less like a circuitry pattern, and more like the runic symbols that were carved into each of Camilla's gateway stones. I was told about your banishment, she said to me sympathetically, her hand against my shoulder, stopping any ability to move as we both stood still and merely allowed all other dignitaries to pass by us. Her follow-up sentence lingering as she seemed to want to wait for an ideal time to talk in between the small clusters of technicians and officials who were marching towards the spiral staircase that led to the castle's southern top spire. Listen, your queen has a lot to deal with right now, and the stresses of leadership might not have Milena in the right mind frame. So please, just lay low, okay? She said, squeezing my shoulder in reassurance. You give me a little time, and I promise I'll find a way to overturn her ruling, she then pledged to me, although saying it softly enough so that no others could overhear it. For now, you just need to stay out of sight and refrain from going anywhere too foolish, she stated, my head nodding slightly in acceptance of her request as I kindly smiled in genuine appreciation of her help. Starting with the sun spire, she then lightly joked, turning me around to face the other way from the castle's stone stairs and wall. Thank you, I responded back, the sincerest gratitude I could offer, given the timing, truly touched by her level of care and compassion. Would you like some help back to the infirmary? No, I'm okay, she politely refused. It's really not as bad as it looks, she added, trying to mask her countless troubles with just a short and quick smile. Just come find me a little after the sun spire is fixed, all right? She stated before turning herself around and exiting the house, slowly limping back down each step outside the palace and disappearing into the chaos of the enthusiastic civilian crowd. And so, once again, I was left there in the empty hallway of my home all alone, the last of the dignitaries passing me as they went up the stairs while I just stood there quietly watching them, uncertain of where exactly to go and what to do. Instead, rather just turning to stare at the walls, over towards the artifacts and oil paintings of older days, the countless souvenirs that acted as reminders of the intense labor and hardship that existed before night ended for all within the borderlands. Suddenly, I had nothing but time to think about my current situation, and because of it, I was starting to feel very scared and sad. At first, it was just confusion, wondering why Midas said our family instead of my family, and whether that one misspoken word meant everything or nothing. But then following further along the thoughts of family, I became incapable of doing anything other than standing there, thinking back to every happy moment and memory I had in the palace. The sadness of it had brought tears to my eyes, but it wasn't because of the fear about what might come next, nor the fact that the queen expected me to leave, but prominently because she hated me enough to actually wish it of me, and how I was supposed to explain it to the others. I fought back tears as I thought about what I would say, staring at depressing antique ornaments left on the nearest wall frame, to cover my tears from anyone who might enter the hallways. All I could think of was how I might become just like those rusted old farming tools whose very use had been long forgotten over time. It was clear to me I had grown up considerably upon my ludicrous week-long adventure. I was stronger and more capable than ever, but I was never going to be happy unless I was beside those who truly cared about me. No amount of wealth could ever make me feel complete without some sense of family. And that's when it dawned on me that the angels above had granted me everything I had ever had wished for. A chance and excuse to escape the city and my life as a servant. And that the second I got this wish, I didn't want it anymore. I immediately wanted something else. The irony that all I wanted now was for all of it to simply be undone. The differences between giving someone what they want and what they actually need were far easier to differentiate in retrospect. Perhaps that's the reason we are not meant to receive everything we want in life. As for me, despite all the ups and downs that came with being a house servant, on a limited income, it was a part of who I was and remarkably something I was going to miss. I wanted to look on the bright side, tell myself that there was no tonic that could treat the sickness I felt when I looked at Ebony and Arlo together. It was a pain that could only go away with time, and that meant walking away was better than staying and watching my one true love marry another. When I saw them try and hug earlier, it felt like I was back in the training pits with Ebony all over again, being beaten down as she kept herself on top of me. But the reality was that this time it was all my own doing. Ebony was winning because I was never truly in the race. Unlike her, I never had the courage to speak up, and therefore never got the chance to find out what might have been. "What's wrong?" Anera asked, appearing behind me, somehow sensing my sadness despite my turned back. I turned to face her, knowing full well that telling her about my possible banishment would be the hardest thing I would ever have to do. So I decided to take a note out of her book and try a little white lie instead. "I'm going to leave the capital, Anera," I told her. "Oh," she said, sounding cautiously cheerful. "Cool. So where are we going then?" she asked, ignoring the serious expression on my face. I took a moment to respond, trying to think of how I would word things delicately enough to spare her feelings so that she didn't feel like I was abandoning her. "No, I'm going alone this time," I eventually stated, unable to think of how to put it any better way, hoping my honesty wasn't too harsh as I inspected her face, trying to read how badly I might have slammed that sledgehammer into her heart. "What? Why?" She chuckled with a silly disbelief, caught off guard, seeming more dumbfounded than anything else. "It's time for me to grow up is all," I said. "I mean, you're all grown up now. How much longer can I stay here as your maid?" I lied, trying to make my excuse sound believable. "You're my friend, not my maid," she said to an obvious offense. "I don't understand. What's changed?" "Nothing. I need to make a life for myself, and it's not something I can do here anymore," I lied. "That's absurd. What is this really about? Just tell me. Is it my brother or my mother? You give me 5 minutes with them, and any problem you think you have will be fixed," she fiercely and sternly announced, her words spoken outwards loudly and proudly, like that of a courageous warrior. Although to the people passing by, it sounded more like the stubborn words of a spoiled brat. "It really is my own choice," I added, trying to calm her. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" she quipped back to me, both unimpressed and somewhat hostile. "I have to make my own life now, instead of just sharing yours," I said in fluster, still trying to persuade her but no longer sure if what I was saying was helping or simply making matters worse. "Kaya, you don't have to leave to make yourself a new life. Tell me what you want to do, and I'll help you get it here," she pleaded. "Don't leave me here alone with these fools, please," she begged, her eyes surprisingly desperate. "At least let me come with you. Anera, you're not going to lose me. You can visit me. But you're a princess, and your mother would never let you come with me." I tried to reason with her. "Then you shouldn't go. You belong here. Just stay." "I can't." "Please," she persisted. "No, Anera, I physically can't. I foolishly divulged in exhaustion. Why not? She pressed, determined to find out the truth. I've been banished, okay? I spat out in a loud confession, putting my hands on my head in defeat, ashamed by how poorly I'd planned telling her. I already knew full well how devastated I was about to make her. My own words cutting through Anera like a sharp knife. The instant mix of shock and guilt I could see manifesting across her pale, bewildered face. Listen to me, I said, grabbing her arms. This isn't about anything you did, okay? I chose to go on our adventure, and I'm thankful for every moment we shared together because of it. I honestly regret none of it, I told her, sensing her shame and blame she was putting on herself for what was about to happen to me. And you're all grown up now, and I couldn't be more proud of you, really. We're both going to be just fine. I don't care, Anera snapped back, pushing me out from her arms, storming off past me. Just give me 5 minutes, she said, only to race towards the spiral staircase. No, don't, I shouted back, moving to try and grab her, her leaps fast and nimble as she scurried up the tower's stone-spiraling stairs with an ever-increasing stride, bolting up those steps with a speedy reform I never had a chance of matching. Anera, wait, come back, I begged, running up the stairs behind her. But she was too far ahead, the distance between us growing more and more with each upward turn. About halfway up the endless turns of those giant stairs, I simply just gave up, lowering my head like the fool that I was while I slumped the rest of the way up the long staircase slowly, thinking about how I'd gone against Camilla's clear instructions to lay low, not to mention how I was about to be single-handedly responsible for the pinnacle argument that would forever break any chance of Melina and Anera rekindling their crumbled relationship. Once near the top, I lingered, half exposed, my head just above the top step of the Sunspire's chamber, taking in the chaotic scene of both Arlo and Anera bickering loudly with their mother. The crystal rested upon the paved floor in the middle of the chamber hall, as every dignitary stood around the walls, trying to politely pretend they were not in the room for the awkward and loud discussion. Anera was on Arlo's left, arguing with his mother about something he had been told. His voice was too muffled for me to hear, but Ebony wanted to hear none of it as she kept herself far from the dispute. The king himself had walked over from the sidelines with a coney, trying to mediate and settle his family's discord in a polite and formal manner that wouldn't embarrass his family in front of all the technicians and council members who stood awkwardly beside the old cracked crystal stone that had already been removed from the main middle socket of the huge motionless golden-framed sphere. Many of the surrounding technicians were nervously pretending to be humble cleaners as they busied themselves with sweeping decade-old dirt into the corners or putting fallen bolts into buckets, feeling the need to look busy so that they couldn't be witness to the echoing commotion and loud shouting occurring from right beside them. It was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. We had a deal, Arlo snarled to his mother. I kept my word, and you're going back on yours. Can we not do this now? Melina said in a scolding, restrictive tone. Son, a king must keep his word, she voiced to him for all to hear. But a queen doesn't. Arlo snapped back rudely, speaking squarely in front of all the engineers and his nearby betrothed, without care of consequence. Akoni dropped his spanner as he and the rest of the scientists eavesdropped beside the crystal by the paper schematics laid out on the floor. Fine then, Melina announced. You win. Tell her, she said. The prince looked to his confused and uncertain bride before surrendering to a sudden defeat in silence. It seemed as though my exile had sparked another controversy that had clearly been swept under the rug. You don't have authority to do this, Anera protested, attempting to change the subject back to her own cause. The queen moved her eyes to the princess, catching a glimpse of me beside the stairs as she did so, the most sour and displeased look across her angry, wrathful face. All I could do was shrug my shoulders in a bold statement, as if to say, well, what did you expect? I do, and it's done. And we're not discussing this anymore, the queen decreed, walking away from the discussion altogether, Arlo following after her and whispering something from the right-hand side of her. Melina snickered dismissively as it was said. Arlo, she said with a satisfied smirk, you're a good, kind man, and you couldn't disappoint me, even if you wanted to, she mocked, rather pleased with herself as she walked away, moving towards me by the stairs. Arlo stood still, infuriated beyond belief, and yet defeated all the same. Obviously, he hadn't received the response he'd wanted. Anera looked to me as she walked towards her mother and Chase, ruffling the back of her dress in a strange discomfort. deciding to let her mother go as she restlessly started fidgeting. Looking around erratically, she stared at everyone near her, appearing almost paranoid that someone was touching her, or as if a parasite sat on the back of her neck and was biting her. She suddenly started bumping into spectators as she wrestled some imaginary opponent, only to vanish with perfect camouflage. Seeing exactly what I just had, Akoni stood up, trying to spot her. "Anera," he called. "Help!" Anera shouted. Everyone's head snapped around in immediate panic, searching the room for the invisible princess. "Quit fooling, Anera," Milena said in a childish denial of what was going on. "Let go of me," Anera yelled, reappearing near the side wall, wrestling with the air. "Anera, what's wrong?" Milena asked, all of a sudden greatly concerned with what she was witnessing. There was a muffling, like the princess was trying to speak but something was covering her mouth. "The princess is under attack," Zephyr called out, smashing 2 flintstones together as he lit the top wick of his bow. He drew an arrow and pulled back his bow, blocking the balcony exit as he scanned the crowd, who stood stunned in the very middle of the room. "I'm over here," Anera called out again, appearing halfway across the other side of the spire. She was on the ground, kicking her legs as if trying to free herself from something. Something invisible appeared to have a steady and strong hold upon her, and it was dragging her away from the crystalline crowd. The princess vanished again a second later. I ran into the center of the room while everyone else quickly picked up tools, like hammers and wrenches, to use as temporary weapons, fearing for their own lives as well as their princesses. No one was doubting the sudden existence of Midas's ghosts that were among us. "Protect the king," an imperial soldier ordered. "Anera, where are you?" Akoni anxiously called out, reaching for his pistol and tapping his glasses frantically, trying to switch between various spectral wavelengths in search for a possible heat signature. "Over there," he announced, pointing his pistol towards the ongoing rustling disturbance beside Zephyr and the balcony corner. Neither Zephyr nor Akoni capable of finding a steady and clear shot with Anera in front of the cloaked creature. "Let me go!" Anera screamed to the invisible assailant holding her from behind, trying to wriggle herself free of it. A ghostly gnoll under a shroud partially unveiling upon a hit to its head, as a surprisingly thin and slender image of similar size to Anera appeared to be holding her from escaping. "Someone do something," Helios demanded, helpless to intervene. "Cover your ears," Milena yelled to us all, giving little notice before unleashing a crippling hot scream. My brain felt like it was beginning to boil as I and everyone else dropped to the floor in instant agony, covering our ears, which did absolutely nothing to shield us from the ear-bleeding pain that had engulfed the chamber room. Milena's banshee cry shook the floor and began to turn my vision black. I was gasping as if I were drowning, sight coming to me only in blinks as my delirious princess returned to our spectrum, only to be tackled down again by our cloaked assailant short moments later. The silhouette of a bow and quiver wrapped around this dark gnoll figure as it stood before an orange descending sun that was slowly setting across the tower, light streaming in from the balcony beside where the gnoll and Anera were upon the ground. The gnoll ripped off its shroud, puffing into a vanishing white smoke. To everyone's combined horror, the princess disappeared along with it.